Is the UK about to introduce a wealth tax? This has been a big conversation in the UK over the past maybe 6 months or so, where the concept of a tax on extreme wealth has gone from being either a kind of vague idea which had some support and some kind of currency, or being something reasonably fringe, into quite a popular idea and quite a sort of powerful narrative within mainstream discourse. The broad proposal is that, wealth inequality has become a systemic problem. And it's become a kind of existential problem for the UK and many other countries. Partly in the sense of, we have a country to run, which requires infrastructure to be built, it requires schools to be run, it requires care for elderly people, it requires a social safety net. There is all of this stuff that we have, that the government has to spend money on, and in an era of wage stagnation, it is harder and harder to meet those expenses. Some of you will also have seen either my debut feature-length film, Boomers, available to watch on Nebula now at go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas, or you will have seen the video that I made just before Christmas last year, I believe, on the kind of population crisis, or the sort of birth rate crisis, whatever you want to call it. But the very solid aspect to that is the fact that we are moving towards an era in which we have proportionally more older people in comparison to working people than we've had in the past. And that is really difficult because, pensions, state pensions, which are an expected feature of wealthy economies in the 21st century, they're expensive to run. They can be sustainable if you have more working people, or when a population is going upwards, it becomes really possible to run a state pension system because you have proportionally more working people than older people, and therefore the amount of pension you need to pay for is always outpaced by an increase in the number of people who are working. However, in a declining population, you find yourself in a situation whereby the number of people who are relying on a pension coming in from the state is going up and up, whilst the tax revenues from working people are going down and down because there are fewer younger people. So there is that practical angle to things in terms of, the income and expenditure kind of balance sheet, as it were, for the state. However, on the other side of it, there is also this slightly more structural, political, moral point as well about the extent to which having a system in which some people can live in extreme wealth, in extreme kind of luxury, and can have access to a kind of lifestyle and existence and also level of influence, which is completely unthinkable to most of the rest of the population. That is a system which is broken in a way that is just really hard to continue to function, right? Because those people who are incredibly wealthy, even if they are living in the same country geographically, often are not living in the same country in any other sense of the world, right? And therefore, it's kind of no surprise when you end up with a broken social contract, because, a social contract sort of implies that you are sharing some kind of existence and have some shared points of reference, which in an era of extreme wealth inequality, those at the very top just don't have the same points of reference as everyone else. I was trying to look up some stats to get across kind of quite how extreme the problem is before this stream. And I came across this study by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a kind of anti-poverty, sort of social justice, economic justice organization in the UK. And they say that this is from data from 2021, but this was published in 2024, that in the UK, the bottom 50% of the population owns less than 5% of the country's wealth, and the top 10% of the population owns a staggering 57% of the country's wealth, which is ludicrous, right? That is, Argonian Bum saying in the chat, disturbing, right? Not Medi saying that can't you hire workers from overseas to compensate? This is for the fact that we have proportionally more older people and proportionally fewer working age people. The challenge is that we are living in an age where everyone wants to be anti-immigration, right? And so for many politicians, making the positive case for immigration from the point of view of, we need working age people to keep our economy afloat is politically toxic. In fact, one of the factors that was really interesting when I was researching this video, because my sort of focus when I was making this video was particularly on why are conservatives really into this, right? Because this sort of birth rate crisis stuff is really popular amongst Elon Musk, amongst your Peter Thiels, your kind of techno-fascists. It's really popular on the political right. And one of the things that they like about it is that framing things as a population crisis in terms of a country as if it was isolated from the rest of the world kind of allows you to implicitly make a anti-immigration argument. And the way they usually frame it, because they will be very keen to suggest that they are not racists, they are not anti-immigration, is that this is actually something which is increasingly affecting countries all over the world. And, we wouldn't want to be taking working age people from other countries because that would be bad for those countries. Even if those countries currently don't have the same struggles, they will get there eventually. And yeah, so we have a scenario in which extreme inequality exists, and is this real moral injustice and kind of social problem in that sense of people living in different worlds. But there is also like this very real immediate problem in the UK of the fact that tax receipts are also down. We are not bringing in as much through tax as it was predicted we might. And after 14 years of Conservative government, complete lack of investment, the country really needs to be invested in, whether that's healthcare, whether that's transport, whether that's housing. In all of these different ways, the country kind of needs rebuilding. And the question is, where do you get that money from? And I'm sure there'll be some watching that will want to make kind of modern monetary theory arguments for, like, the UK prints its own currency, it can therefore print more pounds, and therefore we'll have more pounds to spend, and then it will later, if that's money that's well invested, we will recoup the benefits of those investments further down the line. The challenge is that we're also kind of facing down the markets who don't want that to happen and will kind of threaten to take the country down effectively should that be done. The Sky News article here about what a proposed wealth tax might look like. We'll look at some of the arguments for, arguments against shortly. We'll probably mostly look at the arguments against, because the arguments for are kind of there within the proposal, I guess. We've almost sort of kind of touched upon them already. But the proposal that has come to be the one that is discussed by most people is the idea of a 2% tax on wealth over £10 million. And so, like, £10 million is a huge amount of wealth, right? Most people's homes, which for most people in the UK is going to be their largest kind of asset. I think I'm right in saying median house price. Having a little look at UK house price index for January 2025. Oh no, okay. Yeah, there'd been an annual price rise of 4.9%, which makes the average property in the UK valued at £296,000. Not gonna lie, I thought it was loads more than that. I thought London pushed it up even further. However, if we have a little look at this chart, you can see that it does vary quite substantially based on where you are in the country. Does this separate out London? Yeah, it does. So in London, the average house price is £564,000. Whereas if you go to up into the northwest, average house price is £210,000, which just goes to show that £10 million is, you can own a house in London, you can own 4 houses in London, and probably have, like a car and a whole bunch of other stuff alongside that, and this would not touch you. 4 houses in London, you can have quite a large pension, right? I don't think anyone has a pension that's many, many, many millions of pounds that isn't already living quite a lavish lifestyle before they're retired. You can be pretty damn loaded, and a wealth tax of 2% on a wealth of over £10 million would not touch you at all. Christopher Wallace says, or a small village in the northeast. Yeah, you could own like a whole street somewhere, and nevertheless still not have to pay this tax. Now, one of the really important things to understand about this is that it is a tax on unrealized wealth, which is one of the aspects that's a little bit different about it. Because for the most part, when we tax kind of money that people have, we tax it when they get it. So that might be an income tax, that might be a dividend tax. But in terms of capital assets like wealth, we tend to tax that if you buy something, we tend to tax it when you sell it, right? So this thing in the UK called capital gains tax. We'll look at how some of these taxes compare shortly. But generally speaking, if you buy you buy a plot of land somewhere and it's worth £1 million, right? Because it's a really super great bit of land with a swimming pool in it or something. It's got gold. There's oil. You've struck oil in northeast England, and you've got this patch of land that is worth £1 million. And then over time, because you've struck oil, its value goes up to £2 million. I don't know how much land goes up in value. Or we don't generally tax that unless you sell it. In which case you will be taxed on the £1 million worth of value that you have been gained, the amount that the asset has appreciated in value. And therefore, if you don't want to pay a tax on a thing that has gone up in value, you can kind of hold on to it, and you can decide when you want to liquidate those assets. This would be a little bit different in that it would be a 2% tax on the value of those assets regardless of if you liquidate them at all, to the point where you might have to liquidate some of them in order to be able to pay that tax. So, for example, you might just have, I don't know, £10 million in stocks, say. If you wanted to pay your £200,000 tax on that £10 million of stocks, you'd have to sell £200,000 of them. I mean, someone made an exceptionally good point in the chat a moment ago. Ride here said that actually, if you've got an asset, if you've got £10 million in assets, there are very few assets which do not go up by, generally speaking, by 2% each year. There will be up years and there will be down years, but on the average, there are very few assets or investment classes which, if sort of risk is managed well enough, don't broadly go up by 2% each year. In fact, if you were investing in the stock market in a sort of medium risk capacity, you were investing in like the FTSE 100, maybe the FTSE 100, maybe investing in the S&P 500, you are investing in some kind of index fund of global shares, 2% would be a pretty lousy return for a particular year. That would be a year in which the stock market more broadly had not done very well, and generally speaking would be balanced out another year by a 10% leap or something. Okay, this is from 2025. So when people talk about this is sort of US focused, but I think is useful because a lot of, particularly people with a lot of assets, will probably be investing largely in US markets anyway, even if they live in the UK. So when people talk about the market, they're often referring to the performance of the S&P 500 index. Since 1957, this benchmark index has delivered an average annual return of over 10%. And it goes up and down. There'll be good years, there'll be bad years. But on average, that is knocking that 2% potential annual tax completely out of the water. And this is important for a bunch of different reasons. I think there's a way in which this is really interesting in terms of the fact that, for the most part, in the way things work at the moment, you are kind of encouraged to inflate the potential value of the assets that you own. Because currently, if you are someone who owns a bunch of assets, you often, even if you talk about the fact that those assets can't be liquidated, you might borrow against them to have some money to spend. And it would be interesting to see what happens if we shift to a situation where suddenly, because there's a wealth tax, there is now the incentive to pretend you've got, to be like, oh no, that thing's not worth that much. I promise. And it's worth looking at sort of some of the key proponents of this idea, because I think one of the interesting things about this story is not only that we are talking about it and whether or not it might happen, but the story of like how it has become a thing that we have been talking about. And kind of a big sort of mover and shaker in this has been Gary Stevenson. Some of you would have seen his YouTube videos. He used to be a city trader. He did interest rate stuff in the city of London, made a bunch of money doing so, and then quit, and has since kind of reinvented himself as, I'd say, like a economics communicator. I don't think that's like a word that exists, but in the same way that some people are like science communicators, I would say Gary is a pretty decent economics communicator, right? He is he's not doing dense economic theory somewhere in an academic office. He's sort of breaking down economic ideas so that hopefully people can understand them, whether that's compound interest or living standards, inequality, what wealth is, etc. And what's interesting about Gary is that one of the things that has gained him quite a lot of profile, I would say, is like the YouTube channel has been the beneficiary of the fact that he's had this absolute like best-selling book called The Trading Game. His YouTube channel is also doing extremely well, like it's doing very, very well. But from my perspective, this could be wrong, I would say that is because people have been going out buying and reading the book and then, being on YouTube and then seeing his stuff and being like, yeah, I'm clicking, I remember that guy, yeah. Interestingly, though, is that the book isn't an economics book. It's a kind of memoir of his time in the city, which is kind of more engaging than if it was an economics book. Like, it does a bunch of explaining about how various different things work, what different kinds of trading are, in a way that's really engaging, but it makes it sort of more interesting than if the book was called, like, Why We Should Do a Wealth Tax. And maybe that's his second book. I don't want to suggest that book is not interesting and that you shouldn't buy that one. But I don't know, just a sort of interesting observation. But since that book came out, he's been doing a bunch of stuff on his YouTube. And I think the thing that he's done really well is that... Oh, and he's also been on TV, like, all the time, as well as doing some, like, a load of podcast appearances as well. So he was on Diary of a CEO, the World's Worst podcast, in which he sort of had a debate with this guy who would probably want to describe himself as an entrepreneur. He's effectively an influencer. I looked up his company because I was interested, and his company describes itself as being like a quiz-based leads something or other. It's some sort of bullshit sales thing. It's a fantastic example of people who are really wealthy doing things that that are kind of sort of not even just bullshit jobs, but like bullshit activities. And so really kind of underlines the whole sort of lack of meritocracy to the whole thing. But yeah, Gary's been on a bunch of podcasts, he's been on TV, done like Question Time and stuff. And I think what he's done really well is just to go wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, inequality is bad, wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, wealth tax, in a way that has just never really come off message. I think some people who are sort of political influencers, which I think it would be fair to, I don't mean that in like a disparaging way, or political commentators maybe. A lot of political commentators get to this mode where they get a sort of platform and they do the thing where you go on a bunch of different TV programs and you respond to a whole bunch of different things, and you kind of broadly become someone who is like left of center in some kind of way, and you respond to a whole bunch of different topics on that. I think one of the things which Gary's done quite well in terms of like the results he's got in terms of bringing this topic up the kind of agenda has been to steadfastly stick on that topic. Not that he doesn't talk about other things as well, but like, and this isn't to sort of disparage anyone for like talking about the genocide in Gaza, right? But I could not tell you what Gary's opinions on the genocide in Gaza are. I could not tell you what his opinion on sort of like culture war issues are. I could not tell you what his issues on like the cash review are. I couldn't tell you his opinion. And like I am not someone who would do that same thing. And I'm certainly not someone who is like, we should be quiet about all of these other things and just talk about economics, because I think that leads down a kind of sort of scary path. However, for this particular thing, I think he has really just driven a very particular message. It's like he's not even talked about economics super broadly. He has just gone wealth tax, 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 wealth tax. And that has, over 6 months, 9 months, a year, like over quite a long amount of time, gradually helped get to the point where this is something which is really at the top of people's minds. And I think it is very much building on a foundation of conversations about inequality which did pre-exist Gary Stevenson, right? I don't think he has come like a bolt of the blue and been like, hey, everyone, people live very different lives currently. However, I think in this instance, it has worked, right? So a big turning point the other day was that Neil Kinnock appeared on Sky News. So to clarify, Neil Kinnock was leader of the Labour Party back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he is kind of a Keir Starmer-ish figure. He took over after Michael Foot of this parish, who was a quite left-wing figure within the Labour Party who didn't do particularly well in an election, and then Neil Kinnock took over from him. It is always worth saying that Neil Kinnock was an electoral disaster. He was very much pipped to win an election and then lost it massively. Smaller percentage of the vote than Jeremy Corbyn in both elections that Corbyn stood in. However, for some reason, Neil Kinnock is often framed on TV as like this political sort of oracle that we should listen to. But anyway, all of this to say that Neil Kinnock and Keir Starmer kind of are aligned on a lot of things. And he went on Sky News and he suggested that a wealth tax could be introduced.
In actually defending the caution of the opposition, led brilliantly, in my view, by Keir Starmer. And it was that the essential disciplined caution of opposition won't be allowed to become stiffness or stagnation in government. Now, unfortunately, the appearance has been given, it's not actually the accurate picture, but the appearance has been given that they have bogged down by their own imposed limitations.
I will say there's this really funny narrative that comes out from allies of the current number 10 at the moment that actually Keir Starmer is doing very well. People have just not understood that he is doing very well in a real kind of like, it's not us that's wrong, it's the voters who are wrong, which is excellent to see.
There are ways around that, ways out of it, pathways that I think people are willing to explore and actually would commend themselves to.
Interestingly, just for extra context, Neil Kinnock has largely been brought onto Sky News for this because Jeremy Corbyn has just announced, or sort of, there's a whole thing. There might be a new left-wing political party led by Jeremy Corbyn, or at least involving Jeremy Corbyn, and it seems to be polling not terribly, like it seems to have some support, and so Neil Kinnock has been brought out to effectively, because he's like the anti-Corbyn that they always bring out, despite being an electoral disaster. He sort of is the person that gets, I don't know, they sort of plug him back in and send him out whenever it looks like Corbyn might do anything.
The great majority of the general public. They include, for instance, asset taxes in a period in which, for the last 20-odd years, in the United Kingdom, like quite a lot of other Western economies, earned incomes have stagnated in real terms, while asset values have zoomed. They've just gone through the roof.
Houses,
and
stocks and shares, all of that.
Barely touched, absolutely. And they've been barely touched. Now, you wouldn't have to touch assets of under 6 or 7 million.
This is really
so
interesting.
People's houses would be secure, obviously. But even by going for an imposition of 2% on asset values above 10 million, say, which is a very big fortune.
Now, I need to say, so A, there is like an alternative universe in which a wealth tax is talked about and Neil Kinnock's brought on by like a slightly more left-leaning Labour Party, and Neil Kinnock is brought on TV to describe it as the politics of envy, and that like it's electoral suicide to back, etc., etc., etc. But what's really interesting about this is that like it does very much seem the interpretation is that Keir Starmer and co have effectively rung up Neil Kinnock and said, "Hey, could you're going on Sky News, could you go on Sky News and you're going to mention a wealth tax? You're going to say a wealth tax on wealth above £10 million, 2% annually, because we want to sort of float the idea and see how it goes down with the media and the general public, etc. And we also want like it not to come out of nowhere if we do it. So it's good to sort of get the idea out of there, both to judge how popular or not it is, and also just, to make it not be a complete surprise if it's a sudden thing we do. Could you do that for us, please? And so he's there in this interview going like, yeah, like things we could do, hey, like just to like pull one off the top of my head, like we could introduce, say, an annual asset tax on wealth above £10 million. I say it could be like about 2%. We could start implementing it on like maybe 3 p.m. on the 3rd of September 2025, and that money would be used to do X. It's like, you've thought about this. Like, this is not a thing you are plucking out of thin air. This is not just a thing that has, like, casually come up in the conversation. I guess the big question is, like, whether that is a thing that he has been asked to say, or whether it is just a thing that Neil Kinnock wants to push. I think my assumption would be that he's enough of a party man that if he's going on TV, he's having a chat with Keir Starmer to ask what he should chat about. But this is clearly like a moment, right? Because, as I said, there is another world in which Neil Kinnock is on TV talking about how a wealth tax is ludicrous, or just isn't talking about it at all because he sees it as like an irrelevant fringe demand, right? However, it would make sense if Keir Starmer was wanting to do this and yet was not giving a huge amount of notice. Or Rachel Reeves, sorry. Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves. Because in actual fact, also the other day, Keir Starmer was in Prime Minister's Questions and was asked about whether he was going to introduce a wealth tax by Kemi Badenoch. And he also, well, he didn't say he would, but he refused to rule it out. Which is like a big politician thing, right? No one in actual life is asked a thing and refuses to rule it out. You're not like, I asked Jeff whether he was coming to my birthday party the other day, and do you know what? He refused to rule it out.
No, of course it's not. It's soared under the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, here she goes again, back on familiar territory. She comes here complaining about the national insurance rise every year.
Kemi Badenoch, the woman that you forgot was leader of the Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, he still doesn't understand, so I'm going to make it very simple for him. This is a mess of his own making. He shouldn't be asking how we would clean it up. The fact is, they raise national insurance through the jobs tax, and that's why they have to put up council tax. The truth is, his catastrophic budget has created a domino effect which he cannot now control. We on this side of the House know that you cannot tax your way to growth. But now he's flirting.
I mean, in reality, wealth is sort of a thing that happens after growth. So, the whole point is not taxing work, but taxing wealth. But we'll let her finish. We'll let the right honourable lady finish.
But now he's flirting. They're all muttering. I remember that budget. They were laughing and cheering. They had no idea the mess that they were creating. They should go and explain to their constituents about why unemployment is going up. But, Mr. Speaker, what is more worrying is that now he's flirting with Neil Kinnock's demand for a wealth tax. Let's be honest.
Which I will say, that is, I don't want to completely blow smoke up Gary's ass, but that is Gary Stevenson erasure. to call it Neil Kinnock's demand for a wealth tax.
About what that means. This is a tax on all of our constituent savings, on their houses, on their pensions. It would be a tax on aspiration. Will the Prime Minister rule this out?
All of our houses, all of our £10 million houses, all of our £10 million savings.
Mr. Fitch says we shouldn't be asking them for advice on the economy. She's absolutely right about that. We will not be asking for that.
It's such nonsense, Prime Minister's questions. I have never met anyone who does not kind of either work in the media or is not obsessed with politics that actually thinks that there is a useful function to Prime Minister's questions. So Starmer there, kind of just talks about something else, refuses to rule it out, which, some people have seen as evidence that he might be going there. And it would make sense if it was a thing that he was planning on doing, but was not saying that he was going to do. Ideally, if you want to do a wealth tax, you sort of don't let people know in advance. Certainly if you're doing a one-off wealth tax, which, is another thing that maybe he could be thinking about doing, and just going, we're going to do a one-off wealth tax, but we're doing it now, and therefore you have to pay it now. Generally speaking, not giving a huge amount of notice on those kinds of, they sometimes get called windfall taxes, is good practice, because if you give people too much notice, then they will shift all the money out and you can't do anything about it. And there's some conversation about whether a one-off but slightly larger tax might be more effective than a annual wealth tax. One of the conversations which came up earlier was the extent to which there are also many other ways in which we could reform the tax base, which would have the effect of making people who earn their money primarily from wealth and kind of assets that they own and kind of investments that they have, pay an equivalent share of tax to people who go out and earn money for a living by working an hourly paid job. Because by and large, in the UK at the moment, as in plenty of other places around the world as well, if you earn your money primarily from doing a job, you not only, generally speaking, earn less money in the first place than someone who has a bunch of rental properties or has a bunch of assets or a bunch of investments that they are earning money from. You also proportionally pay more tax on that income than that person who already has a shitload more resources than you. Because, so income taxes in the UK, once you've combined income tax itself and also a thing we have called national insurance, is subject to a couple of different taxes which effectively exist just to confuse things a little bit and make it harder or easier for politicians to either raise or lower taxes. We should just have one thing called an income tax. What we actually have is an income tax and national insurance contributions. Effectively, it's like two doors that lead into the same room. But as things stand, everyone gets a certain amount, £12,570, that you can earn and it not be taxed at all. This is on kind of income. And then you pay 8% national insurance. And you pay 20% on is like the standard rate of tax, basic rate of tax, sorry. If you earn above £50,000, then anything above that, progressive taxation system, you pay 40% on. There is also an additional rate of tax. So if you earn more than £125,000 a year, then anything above that gets charged at 45%. So earned income through a salary gets taxed at least 28% for kind of upper middle class earners who are earning above 50 grand. Some of their additional earnings get taxed at 48%. Someone who's like a real high flyer and is earning 125 grand, anything above that is getting taxed at 53%. And, like tiny violins for people who are earning like those ridiculous sums. But then if you look at, say, capital gains tax, which is the amount of tax, like, say, I don't know why this is the thing that's coming to mind, you buy a bunch of Bitcoin and it doubles in value. The way in which that is taxed is that so first name bunch of numbers saying in the chat that also if you earn over the 50 grand, I think it is, then national insurance on the bit above actually goes down to 2% because we just love people with more money in this country. Capital gains tax. So if you, let's say you buy a bunch of Bitcoin, you hold on to it for a bunch of time, doubles in value. The increase in value from that, which effectively at that point, once you've sold it, is like an income, although it's an income that you've made through like owning a thing, is only taxed at 24%. If you buy and sell residential property and it's not your main home, so it's like a second home or something, the gain that you make on the value of that home is only 24%. That is less than that's if you already are paying a load of tax, right? If you are a basic rate income tax payer, right? So you're not earning a huge amount. So you're earning you're earning like a normal amount in your salary, right? So you're earning less than 50 grand, which in most places in the country, that would put like the median income is but like certainly below 50 grand in most places. You would, and yet you also are buying and selling property on the side. I don't know how likely this is, but then you're only paying 18% tax on your buying and selling of property, whereas your salary, you are paying 28% on. And this is true of like a bunch of other stuff as well. So like dividends. So if you are someone who owns a business and maybe much of your income isn't coming through a salary, but is coming through the fact that the company you run is doing well for itself and it's making a bunch of profit, can be taxed at the lower end at just 8.75%, which is lower, which is only just above the amount of national insurance that you'd be paying on an earned income, let alone the 20% tax you might be paying. Once you get into the higher rate, just the income tax at higher rate would be 40%, plus the additional 2% of national insurance. You are paying 10 percentage points there or thereabouts less if you are making that from profit from a business that you own than if you were making it from salaried labor. And this is a problem for growth, right? If we are creating, so economists love to talk about perverse incentives, deadweight loss, and all of this kind of stuff of if you do this thing, so for example, if you try and do a wealth tax, people will leave the country. However, we've created an economy in which people are incentivized not to go out and labor for pay, right? Not to go out and do productive activity to make money, but to buy and sell property, right? To buy and sell assets, which are not useful things for a country to be doing, right? House prices, for example, just to pick that example, house prices going up in value is not good for the country. It might look good on paper sometimes because it nudges GDP up because of the ways in which GDP is calculated. However, in terms of the lives of people in the country, nothing new productive is being produced there. It is simply that houses are getting more expensive for people to live in. And the same is true of a bunch of different asset classes where actually, if you have people who are just trying to push the value of various different assets up, all that's actually doing is making life for most people more expensive, and you end up in this rentier economy where people are not doing stuff for their money, right? It's not just the moral issue of people who work and therefore are likely to earn less are paying less tax proportionally to people who own assets and are likely to be wealthier. It is that the economy is incentivizing you just to own shit more than it is incentivizing you to like go out and do useful things in the world, which not only lead to economic growth but also like make people's lives better, right? Those things that economists call externalities, but which we sometimes might just call like people's lives being made better in ways which sit outside of the kind of black and white of the economic calculations of money in and money out, but like just make people's qualities of lives better, repair the social contract, all of this kind of stuff. And look, there are a bunch of arguments against this. There has been, which I mean, part of which has shown quite how powerful the idea has become. One of the clear signs of that is quite how much energy has been put into trying to dissuade the government from doing this, right? 10 hours ago, the Daily Telegraph is saying, I'm a successful entrepreneur. If Labour brings in a wealth tax, I'm out. City AM says wealth tax would take years to set up, Labour warned. The Times says billionaires are fleeing the UK and wealth tax could make more quit. To which I would say that one of the problems to which I would say the very fact that inequality is so bad that in order to raise enough money to kind of like run a country, we have to impose a tax, not even a particularly large one, on like a few tens of thousands of extremely wealthy people. And yet they have this ability just to go, do you know what? I'm not interested. I'm going. Like, that is the problem, right? The key problem we are trying to solve here is one of finances of like governmental finances of in and out. And it is a problem if there is part of society that is able just to go, do you know what? I don't want to pay for that. Because that is anti-democratic, right? If there are people that go, I'm actually going to opt out of this particular thing. I know everyone's voted for it to happen, but I don't want it to, so I'm like vetoing that. I'm going to take my ball and play elsewhere. But also, that question of like power, and this is, I think, one of the things that's interesting about some of the ways in which Gary talks about this, some of the ways in which it's been talked about. There's a book about kind of whether there should be a limit to extreme wealth, which came out recently. Like, one of the ways in which that gets talked about there is this idea that, you know, actually there's that power differential of going, wealth inequality is not just wealth inequality, it's also power inequality. And we have such an inequality of wealth and therefore power in this country that if we get to the point where we go, okay, well, we actually might just tax your wealth like a little bit, the fact that the wealth is so concentrated that those people can just move away, like, that is the problem, right? That is such a distillation of how bad wealth inequality has got, right? That we are basically chasing after, I think, like a few tens of thousands of people, and that the challenge of doing so is that they can just go. Like, that kind of is the problem that we're trying to solve, and we either start to try and solve it now or it gets worse. Like, those are the two options. The pragmatic option of going, oh, we shouldn't tax wealth because we want people to come here, like, the only way you can go then is that you continue to decrease taxes on wealth, you continue to decrease taxes on profits, and it's the same thing that's happened with corporation tax, wherein, you know, we let Amazon, we let Starbucks, we let all of these other companies that do widespread tax avoidance, we let them do that because we've decided that, like, it's good for them to be in the country or whatever. And we refuse to do a kind of revenue tax of just going, we currently do have a digital services sort of tax, But that's still 2%. It's like nothing, and we might get rid of it if Trump decides to try and negotiate it away. But we kind of let these companies do that in our country, and like the only way you can go is down once you've decided that that's what you're going to let companies do, because they can always go, well, we'll leave. And at what point do you get? At what point do people with wealth over 10 million quid go, okay, well, we want even lower tax, and we're going to go if we don't get that. And so there's this pragmatic argument against it. But the question is, like, if we don't do something about extreme wealth inequality now, what do we do later? And like, to my mind, if there are, you can kind of look at all this information about potentially millionaires are going somewhere else. And in actual fact, a lot of the data shows that it's probably about the same number of millionaires, billionaires are going to leave the UK this year as have every year for the past decade. And it's interesting that it's similar debates which have been happening around Mamdani in New York, right? So Mamdani, in his campaign for mayor of New York, has also talked about taxing the wealthiest people living in New York. He wants to raise taxes by 2%. The debate is, if Mamdani introduces this tax on the richest people in New York, are they all going to move to Austin or move elsewhere? And interestingly, his team has done the research and gone, actually, when people leave New York City, when wealthy people leave New York City, broadly speaking, they don't move to tax havens. They actually move to other places that have high taxes. And that's because, actually, people aren't moving to or from New York City because of taxes. People like want to live in New York City. It's like a cool place with a bunch of cool stuff happening, right? And I would say that one of the key reasons that people want to, like one of the key push factors for people who are not only willing and keen, but also able to leave the UK at the moment, is that the social contract is broken down. The high streets look terrible. No one fixes the pavements properly when they get ripped up to the thing. We just put like shit tarmac in it. Like public services aren't great. Public transport isn't particularly great. The roads aren't great. So like the quality of life living here is just not as great as it used to be. And therefore, you know, whatever your income bracket, it's less great to live here now than it once was. And that is partly a result of lower investment, which is at least partly a result of a decreased tax base. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg scenario of like, are the people who are saying they are going to leave now if a wealth tax is introduced, are they likely to stick around anyway if it's not introduced? Or is like the UK's like sort of what councils call street scene in terms of like what places look like, sort of quality of life, sort of general sense of positivity or otherwise, like if that continues to decrease, are those people going to leave anyway? Because it's going to decrease if we're not able to find the funds to invest in the country, and particularly if the social contract is going to continue to break down in the kind of way that extreme wealth inequality allows it and encourages it to do so, in which case just do the tax. Just do the tax. And do 3%. Do 4%. Like, we've got a big problem that we need to sort out, and we're not doing it. So let's do it. Thank you so much for watching this clip from one of my Monday night live streams. If you would like to watch more of these clips, but do so both ad and sponsor free, then you can find out how to do so over on Nebula by going to my personal link, go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. You've possibly heard me talk about Nebula before, or maybe one of the other creators that's on there. It's a premium streaming service that we've been building for a number of years now, and the goal is to make us less reliant on third-party, unpredictable platforms like YouTube. Not only does Nebula allow you to watch our videos ad and sponsor free, it's also home to a growing catalogue of exclusive videos and TV series and films too, such as my debut feature-length film Boomers and my Nebula exclusive class How to Research Like a PhD Student, where I tell you a little bit about how I go about the research which goes into both these live shows and also my regular videos over on my main channel. At the same time, Nebula also pays us much more per view than YouTube does, and we get a little kickback for everybody that we sign up, which means that by watching over on Nebula, you really are helping to support the work that my team and I do, both on these live shows and these clips, but also on the main channel videos as well. Better still, if you sign up using my personal link, you'll get 40% off an annual plan, which brings the price down to just $3 a month, which is far and away the cheapest streaming service you will sign up to, and it has no hidden tricks or scams at all, no uplift for no ads or 4K or anything. It is just streaming all day long. That link is go.nebula.tv/Tom Nicholas. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you over on Nebula.